right, so
You ready to dive into some politics?
let's do it.
Today, we're tackling, well, Heywood's politics, which should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big one.
Lots to unpack there.
So we're going to help you sound smart at your next cocktail party
That's right.
when someone brings it up.
Exactly.
What even is politics? I mean, we all think like elections,
That's
mudslinging.
Yeah.
But Heywood takes us back, like way back to Aristotle calling us political animals.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of the fundamental question of political science, right? Is like, what makes us political animals? What is it about the human condition that makes this necessary, this idea of a public sphere that's separate from our private lives?
Right.
That we can't escape from.
So no matter how much we try to be above it all,
Exactly.
we are inherently involved.
Yeah, and that's where this idea of the state comes in.
Right, not just some like vague thing, but like the institution, the laws, everything.
It's the whole shebang. Yeah.
The whole shebang. And the book doesn't just talk about what it is. It's like, is it legit?
Yeah, well, you've got these competing theories about
Right.
where the state's power comes from.
Yeah.
You know, the classic is the social contract, right?
Right.
That we give up some of our freedom
Right.
to this higher power in exchange for security and order.
Right.
But then you've got folks like the neo-pluralists who come in and say,
Okay.
well, hold on a second. There are some players in this system that have way more influence than others.
So not exactly a level playing field.
Not even close, yeah.
Not even close.
No. Okay, so...
And that leads us perfectly into like the different ways that government can actually work.
Okay, yeah, because we've got democracies, we've got dictatorships.
Right, so Heywood throws us right into the mix with Western liberal democracy.
And then they're kind of, you know, less fun cousin illiberal democracies. So you think about like a Hungary where, you know, on the surface, it may look like a democracy.
Right.
But then when you start to peel back the layers, not so much.
Not so much.
And then, of course, you have, you know, systems that don't even try to be democratic.
Right, right.
By our standards. You know?
Yeah.
East Asia, Islamic regimes, it's a whole different ballgame.
Completely different. And each of those systems has their own players, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You've got your nations, your political parties.
Your interest groups, all vying for influence.
This is already making my head spin a little bit, but in a good way.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's like you're seeing behind the curtain all of a sudden. But I think the big question here is this whole politics thing, is it broken?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Heywood kind of leaves us wrestling with, right?
Right.
You know, we're seeing declining trust in institutions. People are checking out of the political process, and then you've got this rise of populism.
Right, and I think a great example of that is, you know, love him or hate him, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Like, his election really, I think...
exposed a lot of the cracks.
Exposed a lot of cracks.
And our assumptions about how the system was supposed to work.
Sure.
And so to understand, like, where we go from here, we need to understand where we've been with this idea of the state.
Okay.
And that it wasn't always a given, right? Like, people fought and died over these ideas that we now just kind of take for granted.
Right, right. So let's rewind a little bit.
Okay.
If the state wasn't just some given, who came up with it? Like, who are the big thinkers here?
Well, you can't talk about the state without talking about Thomas Hobbes.
Okay.
This is a 17th century English philosopher.
Okay.
Who saw some things.
Right. I mean, the English Civil War, not exactly a walk in the park.
No, not ideal. So he comes out of that experience pretty convinced that human beings are kind of hardwired for self-interest.
Right.
Left to our own devices.
Yeah.
It's going to be a free-for-all, a war of all against all.
Right.
Hence the title of his most famous book, Leviathan.
Right.
This idea that we need a strong state to basically prevent us from constantly killing each other.
So we're trading freedom for a little bit of security, not getting murdered every 5 minutes.
That's the social contract, baby.
Okay.
That's the deal.
Right.
Now, of course, not everyone agreed with Hobbes.
Right.
You've got John Locke coming along a little bit later.
Okay.
A little more optimistic about human nature.
Okay.
Still believes in the social contract idea.
Okay.
But says, but wait.
Yeah.
We've got these natural rights.
Right.
Life, liberty, property.
Okay.
That the state can't just trample on.
Okay. So you've got the strong state versus the individual rights.
Right, and that tension is still with us today.
Right. I mean, it's like the fundamental...
It's the heart of so many political debates.
Right.
Like, what should the government be doing?
Right.
Should it be hands-off on the economy?
Right.
Or should it be actively trying to make things fairer?
Right. Right.
Individual freedom versus the common good.
Yeah, and you see that play out in the different types of states that we have, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Heywood walks us through, like, you've got your minimal states.
Okay.
These are the ones that are mostly just focused on protecting individual rights and enforcing contracts.
Okay.
Kind of like a night watchman state.
Okay.
Just making sure nobody's breaking into your house at night.
Right.
Then you've got your developmental states.
Yeah.
These are the ones that are really actively trying to boost economic growth.
Okay.
Improve social well-being.
So they're not just letting the market take us wherever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're trying to steer the ship a little bit.
Interesting.
You look at the Asian tigers like South Korea, Singapore. They use state intervention to become economic powerhouses.
Okay.
And even in Europe, you've got your social democracies.
Right.
Where the government plays a much more active role.
Right.
Providing things like healthcare, education, a safety net.
It's a little different than, the U.S.'s every man for himself capitalism.
Yeah, it's a different flavor of capitalism.
Okay.
Right. Heywood talks about how the U.S. model, there's like turbocharged individualism.
Yeah.
Minimal regulation.
Go big or go home, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas Europe, it's more like, social capitalism.
Okay.
Still a market economy, but with a much stronger emphasis on social safety nets and worker protections.
So the state isn't one size fits all?
Not even close.
It's like all these different factors go into it.
It's shaped by history.
Yeah.
By culture. By values.
Right.
And a lot of times, those values are driven by ideology.
Ideology. Yeah. Everyone uses that word.
Right. It's everywhere.
But what are we even talking about when we talk about ideology?
It's more than just like someone's pet issue.
Right.
Or a political party's slogan.
Right.
Heywood defines it as a set of ideas that help us make sense of the world. Okay. Especially in the political realm. Talk about like what we believe is right or wrong. Right. Fair or unfair. Right. What needs to change. Okay. What we should hold on to.
So it's like the lens that we're looking at politics through.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are a lot of different lenses out there. Right. And they're not always clear cut.
Right. Right.
Heywood walks us through some of the big ones.
Okay.
Liberalism, conservatism, socialism. Okay. He even touches on fascism. Right. To show us where things can go really wrong. Right. But let's start with maybe the biggest one. Okay. Especially in the West. Liberalism.
Okay. So not just like the way liberal gets thrown around.
Right. Exactly. We're talking about like the broader philosophical tradition here.
Right.
At its heart, liberalism is all about individual liberty.
Okay.
Limited government, the rule of law.
That's right.
It's about protecting those individual rights.
Right.
Letting free markets do their thing. Right. And making sure everyone has a fair shot, at least in theory.
Right. Right. On paper, it sounds great, but like in practice...
It gets messy.
Yeah.
And that's where you get all these different flavors of liberalism, right?
Right.
You've got your classical liberals who are all about that hands-off free market approach. Right. And then you've got your modern liberals who think the government needs to step in sometimes.
Okay.
To provide things like social safety nets,
right,
to regulate businesses, to prevent monopolies and protect consumers.
So even within one ideology, you've got a spectrum.
Totally. And these disagreements, they play out in real time. Right. Right?
Yeah.
Like in debates about everything. Right. From healthcare to education to how much we regulate businesses.
Okay, so that's liberalism. What about like its main sparring partner, conservatism?
Conservatism, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's less about like radical change. It's more about like pumping the brakes a little bit.
Okay.
Holding on to traditions.
Okay.
Established institutions.
Okay, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Kind of, but it's a little more nuanced than that, right? Because they see tradition and these institutions as like safeguards against chaos, against the potential tyranny of the majority.
Right, right.
They believe in individual rights, too.
Okay.
But they often emphasize things like personal responsibility, community values.
Right, so it's not like they haven't embraced change at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, free market capitalism, that was a huge change.
Right, right.
That conservatives really championed.
Okay, so even within conservatism, it's not just like one size fits all.
Not at all.
You've got your different like subcategories within that.
Totally. You've got your traditional conservatives who are very big on things like social hierarchy, moral order, often religion playing a role in public life.
Right.
And then you've got, like, the new, which combines free market economics with a more assertive foreign policy. Often very skeptical of big government programs.
Right.
Emphasizing individual initiatives.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a big tent.
Yeah, it's not as simple as we sometimes make it out to be.
Not at all.
And that probably goes for all these ideologies.
100%. They evolve.
Right.
They splinter. They recombine.
Right.
They're constantly responding to new events, new challenges.
Okay. So we've talked about liberalism, conservatism. What about the one that always seems to get people riled up? Socialism.
Socialism, the S word.
Yeah.
Look, at its core, socialism is about a more egalitarian society. Right? Where wealth and power are shared more equally. They tend to see capitalism as inherently unfair, creating winners and losers. And they really believe in democratic control over the economy.
So less about, like, individual ambition, more about everyone being taken care of.
In a nutshell, yeah. But of course, like with all these isms, there are different flavors of socialism, too.
Right.
You've got your democratic socialists who want to achieve these goals through existing democratic systems. So they're pushing for things like stronger social safety nets, universal health care, worker cooperatives. And then you've got your revolutionary socialists who believe that the whole capitalist system needs to be dismantled. Often by force. To achieve true equality.
So quite a spectrum there.
Huge spectrum. And then, of course, you've got the legacy of 20th century communist states. Like the Soviet Union.
Which did not go so well.
Not exactly a shining example. But, you know, that's part of the story, too. And I think what we're seeing now is actually a renewed interest in those democratic, reform-oriented regions of socialism. Particularly among younger generations.
Interesting.
Who are really concerned about things like rising inequality, climate change.
Yeah, so again, it's more complicated than just the scary word.
100%.
Like you gotta dig into the different flavors.
It's not a monolith, right?
Great.
There's a lot of diversity of thought within socialism.
And I think that's probably true of most of these ideologies.
100%.
So speaking of isms that I think have been unfairly demonized, what about fascism?
Yeah, that's a heavy one. And for good reason. I mean, this is an ideology that was responsible for some of the darkest chapters in human history.
So, like, what even is it? How do we even define it?
It's tough because it's slippery, right? It's not always clear-cut in terms of, like, a set of policy prescriptions. It's more about, like, a style, a way of mobilizing people. But if you had to boil it down, it's really about extreme nationalism, authoritarianism, often rooted in this kind of mythologized past, this idea that the nation has been humiliated, and it needs to be restored to greatness through often very ruthless means. And it tends to thrive in times of crisis, economic instability, social unrest, when people are looking for simple answers and a strong leader.
And then it usually doesn't end well.
No, not at all.
So I think it's really interesting how these ideologies that we've been talking about actually translate into real-world political systems.
That's where the rubber meets the road. So Heywood takes us from this realm of ideas into the nitty-gritty of how these ideas are actually put into practice.
So like, how do these things actually affect people's everyday lives?
It's about understanding the institutions, the processes, the rules of the game, how are leaders chosen, how are laws made, how are conflicts resolved. These are the questions that determine how these ideologies are translated into reality.
It's making me realize how much I don't know about all this stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's a rabbit hole. But it's a fascinating one.
But it's one thing to understand the system, but it's another to understand the people who are actually, like, working within it.
The actors on the political stage. The ones vying for influence and control.
So that's where we're going next, I guess.
That's right.
We're gonna meet the players.
Let's do it.
So we've met the players, we understand the rules of the game, but what does it actually look like to play? Like, what does it mean to participate in this whole politics thing?
Right. It's more than just, showing up to vote every few years, although that's important.
Yeah, of course.
Especially in a democracy.
Right.
But it's bigger than that.
Okay.
It's about engaging with the system, right?
Right.
Making your voice heard on the issues that matter to you.
Which, easier said than done. Right.
Well, that's the thing. It often feels like the people in power aren't exactly bending over backwards to listen to ordinary folks.
Like they're in their own little bubble.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
That Heywood highlights.
Okay.
He talks about this worrying trend of declining trust in politicians and institutions.
Right.
People feeling like the system just doesn't represent them.
Right. And so they check out.
Exactly. And that's when you see things like voter turnout going down, traditional parties struggling to connect.
Right.
And then these like anti-establishment movements.
Yeah.
Popping up.
Right. And it's like this feeling that politics is just, it's broken.
Yeah. And that feeling can manifest in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Some people, they just disengage completely.
Right. Like, why even bother?
Exactly. What's the point of voting if nothing changes? Right. But then other people, they get swept up in these populist movements that promise these like simple solutions.
Right. But usually those are fueled by like anger and resentment.
Often. Yeah.
Which historically speaking doesn't usually end well.
Not usually the recipe for a happy ending.
No, not really. So is there any way to fix this? Or are we just kind of doomed to repeat the cycle?
Well, Heywood doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he does offer some potential paths forward.
Okay.
One is strengthening those democratic institutions we've been talking about, making them more responsive.
So less about tearing it all down, more about like renovating.
Exactly. I mean, think about like reforming electoral systems to be fairer.
Okay.
Making sure politicians are actually held accountable for the promises they make.
Right.
Finding ways to make the whole process more engaging for ordinary people.
Okay, so it's like, if we want people to buy into the system, it has to actually work for them.
100%.
Okay.
And that's where these new forms of political participation come in.
Okay.
Think about, like, social movements. Online activism. They might not fit the traditional mold. But they are getting people fired up. They're demanding change.
Yeah, like those, what were they called? The climate strikes a while back.
Exactly.
Like thousands of kids skipping school to go protest.
Yeah. That's powerful stuff.
It is powerful.
And social media has been huge for this.
Right.
It allows these movements to organize, to mobilize, to amplify their message globally.
But it's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, social media can also be used to spread all kinds of misinformation.
Oh, absolutely.
And like sow division.
Yeah, it's a tool. And like any tool. It can be used for good or for bad. And that's why Heywood really stresses the importance of media literacy.
Being able to like think critically.
Exactly. Being able to critically evaluate information. Especially online.
Not just believing everything you see.
Because if you do that, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
So being a responsible citizen in the 21st century, it also means being a smart consumer of information.
100%.
Okay.
Critical thinking. Fact-checking. Being aware of your own biases. These are essential skills.
Yeah, so it's not just about being well-informed. It's about like knowing how to think.
Exactly. And being willing to engage with different perspectives, to question your own assumptions.
Okay.
And to be open to changing your mind.
Okay, which I think these days, that almost sounds kind of radical. Like, oh, you're going to change your mind based on evidence.
What?
Yeah.
Crazy, I know.
I know.
But that's what it's all about, right?
Okay, so Heywood, he takes us through all this stuff about the state, about ideology, about political systems. If you had to like sum it all up, what's the big takeaway here?
That politics is a conversation.
Okay.
It's messy.
It's
ongoing. It's a debate about how we want to live together in this world.
Okay.
And it's a conversation that we all have a right, even a responsibility to participate in.
Yeah. So whether that's, voting, joining a movement, just staying informed.
Staying engaged. Because at the end of the day, this is about shaping the future that we want to see. So the next time somebody tells you politics is boring,
oh man,
you tell them to think again.
Tell them to read Heywood's Politics.
There you go. Well said. I think that's a good place to wrap things up.
Yeah, this was a lot.
This was a lot, but it was really interesting.
It's fascinating stuff.
It is. All right, so that was our deep dive into Heywood's politics.
Hope you enjoyed it.
I think we gave everybody a lot to think about.
A lot to chew on.
Until next time.